Hello everybody. Welcome. Bienvenido. We've had colder weather here for a couple days at night. Still quite warm. Right now, cloudless, beautiful, the sun is blazing. And as usual, I'm overdressed. One of the most amazing things about this is that my experience over the past week of light itself has changed. And we tend to think that these stable things like, stable concepts like light, time, identity, and so forth. Language predisposes us to imagine them as static knowns. And they are not. In fact, if there's any deception in our human experience that is so fundamental as to affect all other aspects of our experience in nature, it is this one thing, the concept of static identities, stable static identities as presented by language. All of you know viscerally what the word apple refers to. But it's very easy to forget that the infinite topology of appleness and apples is uncapturable and cannot be pre-stipulated for at least two important reasons. And the first is that the physical object referred to with this word is unique in every single instance. But much more profoundly, those who see or touch or handle or taste an apple are transformed by this, and those who participate with the apples in whatever way they might, their identity is changed and the nature of apples changes. Right? The between space of beings and phenomena is where most of what's going on is going on. And much of our ways of using language, not necessarily language itself, deeply influence us to suspect and believe and suppose something that is not only not true, it is more impossible than if you could pick Saturn out of the sky with a spoon and swallow it. It is impossible. Not in the way that I often talk about. This is a different kind of impossibility, right? This is the kind of impossibility that diverges from the way that living beings and living worlds and stars and so forth import the impossible into physical reality and embody and inform it. This is the other kind of impossibility. This is a formal impossibility that relates to features of how we interact with the prostheses of language, conception, ideation, reflection, awareness, consciousness, exploration, unforgetting, insight, discovery, questing together to restore, nourish, and fertilize the potential space of our human natures and experiences. So this is a kind of impossibility that is a truthful impossibility, right? It is a fact. It might be the most fundamental fact you could possibly arrive at, that language, and particularly concepts of static identities, stable, prefab characteristics, identities, features, and so forth that are pointed at with words like apple or man or woman, raccoon, etc. The way we use these is not merely deceptive, it's the foundation of all deception from a number of extremely powerful and useful and helpful perspectives. So let us bear this in mind together. Again, it isn't that language is intrinsically bad. There are languages, I'm aware specifically of Blackfoot language. In which there are features that resemble immunity factors to these problems. Ancient peoples were highly aware of these dangers of presuming the identity of beings because relationship has the primacy here. The between of beings has the primacy, not the separated, distinguished concept or idealization. Right? So it's not that language is bad, it's the way we use it. And the ways we are entrained, instructed, peer pressured, and so forth to use it. So that's my preamble for today. Today is the release date for the documentary Age of Disclosure. And I've not seen it yet. I hope to watch it soon. This is a crucial topic for me that has fascinated my father and I primarily since early childhood. I was fascinated by space. I read oodles of science fiction, at least a few thousand stories, books. And so anyone who has been deeply exposed to science fiction is unlikely to be... I've met a couple of guys who are. They're unlikely to be skeptical about these matters, and science fiction has been probably the most important genre of human, composed information that I ever encountered. Particular books or stories like White Fang Goes Dingo by Thomas Dish, What If the Stars Are Gods by Gordon Eklund and Gregory Benford, A Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge, and, many, many other stories, almost the entire oeuvre of Philip K. Dick, which I've read all of, particularly his exegesis, but so many other stories, 2001: A Space Odyssey, the works of Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, the story Mimsy Were the Borogoves by a woman using a man's pen name, the stories of Ursula K. Le Guin, many other brilliant female authors who wrote fantasy and or science fiction. These were my mentors. These were my teachers. And, I read Chariots of the Gods when I was quite small, probably 7 or 8. We saw the film together, my father and I. We were deeply intrigued and I recall one specific long conversation about UFOs as we traveled from, I think, Sacramento to Santa Rosa to visit my grandmother in the night. And it was a wonderful conversation. All throughout my life I had hoped to have an encounter with beings from elsewhere who, because I knew that somewhere in the universe there must be actually intelligent beings. And occasionally you may encounter a human who is actually intelligent and can demonstrate this and can inspire and, set into the spirit of inspiration the between of you and this being, right? You and this human. And primarily, the people who I've met who are like this are artists, or they're elderly folks, or they are prodigies, or they are feral. What do I mean by feral? So, I am a feral human. And particularly the story White Fang Goes Dingo deals with this topic. Just want to mention Robert Sheckley, Henry Kuttner, H.P. Lovecraft. Who's the guy who's Lovecraftian that I love? It's less well known. Maybe his name will come to me. So many brilliant science fiction authors. These were the prophets and really the holy people of our age who hid in this peculiar backwater where they wouldn't necessarily be crucified. Harlan Ellison's Dangerous Visions is a crucially important collection, as is the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. Theodore Sturgeon's Microcosmic God was important for me. But so many stories. I remember very few of them, because most of them I read either in childhood or in my teens. And I'm getting on in years. So having been deeply exposed to science fiction and realizing very early on, after seeing images of war, concentration camps, animal testing, I realized my species is not intelligent. We have something that mimics intelligence, and it's incredibly dangerous. It's a threat to all life in all of time, not merely life on our world. So in honor of the age of disclosure, I'm going to talk today about the moment when my dream of meeting actually intelligent beings came true. And I thought that it was very unlikely for me to have the experience of encountering what we usually refer to as a UFO, these days a UAP, and to have, colloquia, a conversation with the beings inside. I hoped for it, but it seemed impossible, right? Like, I thought you'd have to be somewhere very remote. And I am not usually in remote places. Unfortunately, my situation has kept me rather imprisoned, in a way, in the place where I currently live. It's very sad, this. However, I thought, well, it's not likely to happen to me here, and here is where I mostly am, so probably it will never happen. And after reading Castaneda's books in my 30s and becoming very interested in this history of Toltec non-ordinary abilities and magic and so forth, I thought perhaps I might go to South America and try to seek out someone like Don Juan who could teach me. I remember I wrote to one of the witches, Taisha Abelar, and she wrote me back. She said there wasn't much she could tell me, but that I should study martial arts, and particularly soft martial arts Bagua, Tai Chi, energetic, arts that deal with the generation and transformation and manipulation of Qi. I still have that letter somewhere. So in honor of the release of the Age of Disclosure, today I'm going to speak a little bit about what happened when my lifelong dream came to some wildly unexpected fruition. And I met and had a long and very intimate interaction with good luck. Good luck. Well, what was it, Darren? Well, it wasn't a what, it was a who. And it wasn't necessarily even a singular who. And it wasn't a who that naturally belongs to any of the categories, the very limited, delimited and inhibiting category tree of our lexicons, right? Which starts with something like being or thing, mystery, being or thing, right? And then branches off, the beings branch off into animal, vegetable, insect, water creature, sky creature, so forth. But even these branches are troublingly missing most of their branches. So I don't know. And I'll be the first to say I don't know. And, it's very common for humans when they hear about this, they want to know, well, what was it? Right? Good for them. I wish them luck. It's like trying to understand, it's like trying to count yourself, one by one, the grains of sand in the universe. Right? And once you get it all done, then you will know what they are. This is not true. There's no kind of counting that tells you what something is. And in fact, we don't know what humans are. We just have this word, and we're familiar with it, so feeling that we know, we feel therefore unthreatened, right? And we go about our prosaic, everyday stuff. Now, one could probably more reasonably ask, well, how did it seem? What did it seem to be to you? And obviously, it's natural for people to wonder, well, why didn't you ask it what it was? Yeah. I'll explain why this is problematical. But I don't know what it was. I have, different toys with which I think about it sometimes. And when I begin to tell the story, I think you'll see why it's not possible to empirically determine the identity of the non-human intelligence with which I had Congress. And in fact, I'm sure that many people will simply say, oh, he's making this up. Good for them. I have no problem with them saying that at all. Not what's going on, but skepticism of this kind is endemic in moderns, stupidifying, blinding, domineering. I mean, they're afraid of bullshit, but they're not afraid of the bullshit of authoritative dismissals. Right? Unjustified authoritative dismissals of phenomena and experiences. They should be more afraid of that. In the pie chart of bullshit, this is most of the pie. And the lying, making things up, delusion, psychosis, etc. is a very small portion of that pie compared to this portion. However, I'm not going to concern myself much with what other people may think or say, because that would make this discussion very tedious. I think I'm going to leave out, well, So I've had a long relationship with writing, and I've discovered that writing and language are non-ordinary. They're not like what we think at all. They are as weird can be. And I was joking around with my friend's daughter last night because, she said, "You always say I'm weird and amazing." And I said, yes, but think about how actually weird all of the normal things are, because they're often much weirder. It's much weirder that something is normal than all of the weird things that we think are weird. I don't know the etymology of this word, but I suspect it has something to do with breathing and or spirit, or not being fully physical, right? The non-ordinary. So I had many formative and unexpected experiences with language that I think were deeply inspired by people who experimented with it, particularly William S. Burroughs. Although I'm not necessarily a huge fan of his writing, his relationship with language is feral and science fiction-y and impossibly insightful. As someone who did a lot of experiments with language, and you might wonder, well, what does that even mean? It means lots of things. It means making unusual recordings, cut-up methods, writing, automatic writing, learning how to write things that couldn't be thought under ordinary circumstances and things like this. My relationship with language has been paranormal, at least since my 20s, my mid-20s, when I began to explore psycholinguistics and the strangeness of language in a very experimental, curious, passionate, and direct way. And sometime around 1999, I think, or 8, I was sitting at my Mac one night, and suddenly this incredible inspiration, unlike anything I've ever felt, overcame me. It's funny. Just realized there's another linkage here. And I began writing feverishly, just like it was just flowing out of me. I envisioned a book. I'd been trying to understand the nature of injustice and why my species is broken. And I felt in this moment that I had been given an insight into this matter, a deep insight that could be transformative or medicinal or maybe even solve the problem. This resembles the insights that drove Alfred Korzybski in his book Science and Sanity. So I began writing, and I got about 150 pages in, got a notification that there was an update for my OS. I'm a Mac tech. The document was closed, saved. I applied the update. The computer crashed during the update. When I got things back together, that's a bad sign, by the way. And when I got things back together, the document was gone. And I was absolutely crestfallen. I could not recompose it. The inspiration had left me. I was devastated. I had never written anything like this. And I felt that something absolutely crucial to my being had been lost. Now, I should mention a non-ordinary experience that happened about a year or two prior. I had been on a long hike with my then girlfriend. I'll refer to her by her initials MD. And we were lying in bed, and I began to have the feelings associated with hypnagogic experiences of the between space. So these would be like energetic pulsing in my body, strange high-pitched noises, and then suddenly up in the as if it was coming from the upper left corner of the room in which I still sleep all these years later. I heard this booming voice, like nothing I had ever encountered, a non-ordinary voice, like a thunder voice. And it said, instead of emulating the voice, which I think might be dangerous, I'll just say what it said. I am here. But in like a thundering voice that shook me to the core of my being. And at first I was kind of in shock. And then I began to laugh because it was because of the blatant obviousness of the fact, and it's the facts matching with this phrase, right? So part of me was just like, you sure are. I don't know what you are, but you sure are. And then, I woke my girlfriend and told her what had happened. She became very upset with me. Interestingly, there are other precursors here that I'm going to leave out. A particularly strange dreaming experience, which I've detailed on my website. And a few days later, I spoke with my ex-girlfriend, and I mentioned this to her, and she just went white as a ghost. And she said, a few days ago, I wasn't feeling well, and I was in my living room, and I heard a voice say, I am here. And my then girlfriend, MD, complained for a long time afterward, being very upset with me for having said this to her, that she kept hearing it when she was falling asleep in her mind. And so these events preceded the event in May 2002, during which contact was established. And what happened that night is I was again sitting at the same desk with a different Mac, a newer one, and I was gripped by a very similar inspiration. And I began writing an essay called Symbols and Sanity. And as I was writing it, I envisioned for the first time for me a situation in which I want to be very clear about this. It was as if I could see that it was so. This was not me merely imagining something. I could see that it was so, that human minds formed a field, or in technological terms, a network, and that this network was a world at least as real, or possibly more real in many ways, than our physical world. And then I could see that there were, that analogously, there was something vaguely similar to organisms in that world, but they were not necessarily alive. And they were extremely competitive, not like actual organisms, more like the relationship between technology and humans. They were almost like a technology. Except they weren't machines. But they have many qualities in common with machines. And these things, these processes, they pervade over the network, and they attempt to capture it, and they compete for terrain acquisition, for dominance over the transports of the network, for mutation and reproduction rights. They mutate very rapidly. Time in that network is not like this, like our time. And in both cases, I did the strange thing and the rather unusual for me thing of creating neologisms, right, new words. And I called the world of the human minds the cognitium, which I would later realize was a distinct element in a vast library of cognitia. And I called the organism, the very domineering and aggressively competitive organism, like elements that live on that world, so to speak, that exist on that world. I called them thrisps. And they seemed basically deleterious to me, like you would not want these. And there's something that isn't a thrisp. There is an opposite of a thrisp, which I have not invented a name for, but I think of it as the origin signal because...
I know, but you make it more. So
you got an original work of art
yeah,
there.
yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I love like artistic things.
Yeah, I kind of do a little of that myself. But
Yeah.
this is, wow.
Yes, I think of there is this thing that like heat melts ice. There's a feature of the cognitium that both inhibits thrisps and restructures them in a way that isn't deleterious. They're not all deleterious. They're not all bad. But the kinds that hold sway in the human cognitium are mostly bad, I think. So I saw these two new ways of seeing, and I made these words, and then I was thinking about how to speak about the infrastructure that connects the human minds, which is not merely physical, bunch of transphysical infrastructure. And it was as I was thinking about what to call this that suddenly it was as if when I went, of course I didn't go anywhere, when I turned my mind towards its own interior, in the same way that I did when I invented the word cognitium, to make this word for the infrastructure, it was as if there was a room, a place in my mind I had never seen before, an aspect of my mind I was unfamiliar with, and it seemed to be somehow off to the left. Hemispheric lateralization people, have some fun. We'll have some fun with that. And there was a light, like nothing I had ever imagined. There was a light in my mind. And the light began to teach me impossible things. And the transport of this teaching was not a verbal thing, and it was not a mental thing, and it was not telepathy. It was something we have no word for. And in a way, it was as if, in a technological sense, as if it entered a password into my consciousness. And it showed me, obviously there's no way to describe my experience, so I'm just going to do the best I can with the limited tools I have at my disposal. But it showed me a sequence, right? And superficially, this is not the important feature, but it's also important. This is a transformation that this is a sequence of transformations that recodes the concept of dimensionality. So it showed me a dot. The dot could, by transposing itself, so you have like a white dot, right? And then very rapidly it disappears and goes one dot to the left, and then that disappears and goes one dot to the right, or two dots since it's going to cover the central dot space. And then, back and forth. Right? And if you speed this up, what you get is a line. Right? If you speed this up, you can't tell there's a dot. It just looks like a solid white line. So there was the dot, then a horizontal line in this fashion, and then a vertical line, and then both a horizontal and a vertical line forming a cross. And then the line spun off, so to speak, the horizontal and vertical axes and made itself at a random angle in a circle. So really what you have is just a line appearing and disappearing, right? It grows out from the center and then it shrinks back to the center. But if it does this horizontally, you get a horizontal line, if it goes very fast, and so forth. And so now it began to spin off the plane of the horizontal, like at a random angle. And if you speed that up, you get a disk. And then if it spins off the flat plane, if it does the same thing and spins off the flat plane, you get a sphere. And you cannot tell that the dot, you cannot tell that the sphere or the lines are being composed by the dot at high speed, at a high refresh rate, right? High iteration rate. So dot, line, cross, disk, sphere. And then a final thing, a final transformation in which the sphere having already been formed, one takes an angle from the point within the sphere out in some direction. You make a line whose endpoint is extremely far away from the sphere. Say, many light years away. And then if you turn the dot that this line is anchored to or is being forged by, if you turn that dot, the endpoint will traverse an impossible amount of space instantaneously. And this, it seemed to me, was not merely a toy that reforged my understandings of dimensionality in a new way. It seemed to be the ultimate toy. This is the key to all knowledge, all perspective, all potential. And the implication was that I had lived in a state of deep confusion and blindness my entire life, and that nothing was impossible. Nothing. Travel in space-time, occupying multiple minds simultaneously, the transformation of matter according to will, all of these things, none of this. There was no such thing as all of the impossibilities that I had been scripted to suppose were imposed upon physical beings like myself. And I saw that perhaps, the sun was like this, an organism was like this, words are like this. This was a holophore, right? A toy above all toys. And my mind was swimming with cascades of unimaginable insight in the first few moments. And then I paused because I had control over the situation, right? Like I had consensual, my participation in it was consensual. So I wondered what the hell was going on. I'd never had an experience that even vaguely resembles this. It was as if I was having a new form of experience. And, I thought, have I gone nuts? Right? This is kind of a natural thought. Have I lost my mind? Am I going insane? But if I looked away from the light in my mind, everything was normal. I was fine. I could see my room around me. I felt physically okay, mentally, good. And to put it mildly, this interrupted the inspiration stream that was fueling my writing. Though I did continue to write for a little while, a few more paragraphs. And then when I returned in my mind, I was like, okay, so everything's fine. And I returned to that little light in my mind that began teaching me again. The same way. And every time it showed me this sequence of transformations, there were new features of it. New implications, new associations, new connotations. It was like having the root basis of my mind, and especially my cognition and my ideation, reforged moment to moment in a way that was geometrically or algorithmically self-expanding. And I tried to, just like anyone might, I tried to figure out what the fuck is going on, right? What is this? And I thought, I've always been a bit of a prodigy. Maybe this is my hidden genius, and this is the genius that has been with me my entire life, but I have never. Now it's going to come forth, right? Like a seed I had been carrying, finally sprouting. There had also been a series of strange physical events that preceded this in the weeks leading up to it. They were pretty weird. I'm not sure if they're relevant here, but I'll just mention that briefly. That day in, I think, actually, it was probably March. It's really hard to remember what the day was. And I still have documents, but I don't believe that I have the untouched original document that I was writing. And of course, once this process began, I began writing madly. Probably written a few thousand pages of material about this, most of which has never been seen. Reminiscent of Philip K. Dick's experiences, although his experience, as I understand it, lasted a very short time on a single day, and my experience lasted for 9 months in its primary phase. And I went through some radical transformations during that. I'm going to leave out most of the personal stuff for right now and just talk about the experience. So, I've read many reports of contact between humans and non-human intelligences, and occasionally some kind of information is transferred. It usually seems pretty simplistic, like the kind of information that could be transferred in language. My experience with this, what I understand to be a non-human intelligence, is not like those experiences at all. And this may sound arrogant, but I've never encountered anything that, even a single thing that somewhat resembles what happened to me. I am certain that there are people who have had this kind of experience, and it may, what the implications of my experience are so profound that, for me anyway, that I strongly suspect that the intelligence that I was in contact with is to minds themselves like the sun is to light around here. It causes there to be minds. Now, the experience went through a bunch of transformations over the initial phases. At first it seemed perhaps that I was in touch with a kind of a genius that had always lived inside me unknown, a hidden genius, and that this was mine, right? This is part of me. But very quickly that fell away, and it was like being in a kindergarten or an elementary school with an alien, how we might imagine that to be, because they reforged. It was a form of training, driven primarily by my questions, that reforged the root aspects of my mind, and my ontology, and my lexicon, and my relationships with language, matter, light, time, being, memory, dreaming, consciousness, very dramatically, very quickly. I think in the first 5 minutes of that experience, I learned more than I had learned in my entire lifetime before. And there's a science fiction story that I think has some relevance here, called Flowers for Algernon. The author's name is escaping me at the moment. In this story, a developmentally impeded young man is given an experimental drug that transforms him into a raging prodigy. But then, so he becomes first human, and then transhuman, and then metahuman, and then, dot, right? But then, after a time, the effect of the drug wears off, and he's returned to his previous situation. So in the beginning, I thought, this is my genius. I will change the course of history with this knowledge that is far beyond anything the humans I've ever heard of among the humans. And then it seemed like I was in conversation with an alien. And then, some days later, it seemed like a group of alien intelligences. And then it seemed like a colloquia of alien civilizations who were speaking with a single voice, except there was no voice. There was no talking. This intelligence never spoke to me. Nor, interestingly enough, did it tend ever to use declarative language. It used figurative language. Think of this as if thus and such were the case. And then it seemed, I'm talking now about the first few weeks of the experience. Then it seemed that all of the alien civilizations in all of time all of the civilizations could speak with this central being's mind in my mind. And in the beginning, I had a pet name. Once I realized or felt that this is not my mind, this is another intelligence, obviously. It knows things humans have probably never known. It certainly knows things humans have never known. The vastness of its capacities implied, and it showed me that this, how to put it? I can't say it showed me this was the case, but it said, imagine if your mind supervenes over all minds in all of time and participates in them directly, such that they are all organs of its unity. And any group or subgroup or recursively constituted multi-groups of these minds can be simultaneously inhabited, shared, transformed, set on missions, and so forth. We are like this, they showed me. So I had a pet name for the first phase, which probably lasted 3 to 4 months. I called that being whiteRabbit, after the rabbit in the Alice stories. They showed me the histories of many worlds. They showed me civilizations rising and falling, living worlds appearing and dying, what the nature of time-space was about. Fundamental questions perspectives on these questions were revealed to me that were impossible at first to even contain in my memory long enough to commit them to memory. In the beginning, I had to struggle. It was as if some aspect of me was like the vibrational rate was being raised. So there was an incredible enthusiasm, a kind of terrifying enthusiasm. My heart rate would rise dramatically, somewhat frighteningly. I would feel terror and awe, unimaginable inspiration, and the deeply felt and treasured precious sense that with knowledge such as this, I can change the course of my people, right? I could perhaps become messianic. A very dangerous idea, by the way. Not an entirely inappropriate idea. We all come here to be messianic. It doesn't mean we're going to become messiahs, but there are situations in which our role will transform into the one who saves, right? The one who rescues, the one who resuscitates or resurrects or liberates. Yeah? So, yeah, it was really difficult. It was very challenging for my psyche and my ego to cope with all of these, with this situation. And I struggled with it. Over time, things cooled down a bit. And it became not normal, but also not so egregiously. See, if you take like a balloon, right, and you suddenly dump a bunch of more air into it, what will naturally happen is one of two things. Either the balloon will pop, or it will embolize, right? There will be a place on the membrane that is thinner than the other places, and you'll get an embolism, like a bubble will bubble out. And one's psyche is like this. Under great pressure, right, it naturally deforms. And it was as if the pressure of insight and awareness and sensitivity had expanded so dramatically over such a short period of time and continued to expand really catastrophically. There was no end to it, although the intelligence, it titrated its effect on my awareness. It was clear that it was attempting to titrate its input so that my mind and my psyche and my body would not be destroyed by it. I sometimes liken this to trying to pet a very small gnat. Right? I'm not going to be able to pet it with my fingertip. It's not sensitive enough. So I might take one of my eyelashes and just very gently pet this gnat with my eyelash. This is an analogy of what I think was probably going on. So in the beginning, I thought, I had this pet name, whiteRabbit. One word. And I used this pet name privately to refer to this intelligence that had, what was going on. It was not like communication. It was something very weird. It was like my mind becoming an organ within a much vaster and primordial and ancient and truly intelligent and seemingly entirely virtuous intelligence. So that it could transfer directly to my awareness in the first person its experiences and perspectives, understandings and figurations. And it could also replay histories. And when this happened, a bunch of sensitivities that I had never realized were possible arose in me. These are things that we would normally think of as being associated with becoming psychic. I think we've got this backwards. I think all these faculties naturally belong to us and they are inhibited. So it's like we are unpsyched or something when we were born for waters we've never seen. One moment. This is going to sound, loopy. I don't really care how it sounds. Make of it what you're free to make of this, of what I speak here, whatever you wish. Or not. So a bunch of senses arose in me that I had little or no previous experience of. Very deep senses about letters, language, words, and numbers. Symbols. Became redolent with as if I could see the entire history and origination paths of these symbols. I could, if I chose to, I could look at a being and know impossible things about them, where they were born, their name, their parents' names, where they would die, if they were injured, if they had pets, if they had illnesses. The world became like a living array, like a living library. So that whatever I might put my attention on unfolded these universes of histories and futures. And I began to be capable of seeing into time, but this is a very complex matter because it's different from mere precognition. Time is like a being, or a transcendental aspect of reality, existence, etc. And when one begins to see into time itself, this creates a feedback problem that is lethal to cognition. So I didn't go around predicting futures, but I could see into time. And I was aware of futurial events without them being specifically placed on a linear timeline. I seemed to be able to cause immediate healing. There were a couple of events where I came across an injured person. I knew what was wrong with them. I laid hands on them. They were shocked. They said that the pain had gone away, and I don't know what the futures of those situations were. There were about 5 of them over the span of my experience. It was literally like being taken to a superposition above where time and identity and mind are local. And now they're in a superposition, and from there, the view is unimaginable and completely obliterates human ontologies. There's nothing left of them. And then about 3 months in, the intelligence began to explain to me that it had been preparing me, and it was like traversing a series of lessons or learning like a musical instrument or something, right? How to survive in a situation where my mind was not forged for this. My human mind was not forged for this. So I had to be kind of re-educated and trained to survive and to be able to maintain a coherent mind within this chaos of insight that was constantly flowing into me. And in the beginning, as I mentioned, I could not hold the information in consciousness long enough. It was a very peculiar mode of awareness or information or perspective that resembles that of dreaming in the sense that it's difficult to hold it in one's waking awareness. So for the first few weeks I struggled. Then I began to hold the figures to be able to hold the figures in my consciousness long enough to sustain them in memory. And then I began to learn to translate them into things that humans could understand. And there were specific toys that I was given. I call these things toys, these perspectival figures. They are, in a sense, ontological primitives or holophores, core features that inform ontologies. And there are a number of such toy-like things that I preserved and translated at length. Some of these are included in the link to the book called Skybook on my Organelle website, on the index page. the hand toy, a thing I call Godspeck, the dandelion, toys about what actually the story in Genesis about the Tree of Knowledge is about, toys about the nature of Hebrew and Arabic, Godspeck, let's see, there's a couple of others. The most primordial of them is the dandelion toy, which is really the translation, one translation of what the initial sequence, right, of the dot line, cross, disc, sphere, X sequence implies about the nature of that which is, they who are. Now, I had, a living adventure, unlike anything I'd ever imagined, like something out of a science fiction novel or fantasy story, for those 9 months. And I don't want to speak today a lot about my personal experience, which was very fraught and dangerous and confusing. I had no one to speak with other than whiteRabbit in the beginning about these matters, and I did not really pursue matters of personal concern with them. We were in a kind of a school, I was in a kind of a school with them. I was seemingly undergoing an array of trainings and elevations of my faculties over those first few months. But then around month 3 or 4, whiteRabbit began to explain that the initial preparatory phase was coming to a close and that I had been prepared sufficiently to engage with a more momentous intelligence. And this intelligence I refer to as toyMaker. I will mention one thing that I left out so far, which is that one of the first communications, and maybe the closest thing to a declarative statement that I can recall from this experience, is that in the early phases, once I realized this is not my own mind, there's someone is with me, right? Are you looking for a place? Okay, so there's one entrance up there, and there's one entrance a little ways up here, and probably this one is better. Certainly. They made it clear to me that they are not God, and they didn't seem to mean this in the negative sense, like we are against God or anything like this. They seem to mean, please don't confuse us. You will think we are God because we are omniscient. Right? We will seem omniscient to you. But that is not the case. There are later stories about this situation. So then in like the 3rd or 4th month, this vastly more momentous intelligence began teaching me. And now it was like, rather than a colloquia of alien minds, I was speaking with some principle, right, of existence, the Logos, maybe what is meant by Hermes or Thoth, or an angel. And I came to think of it as an angel, and if I had to pick which one, I think of it as the angel usually referred to as Metatron. But this is not my only way of thinking, and I truly do not know the what of this. It's so funny. There were other weird features. Animals responded to me with deep recognition and engaged me in games that I've never seen animals play with humans. Little children seemed to recognize very clearly this presence. There's a story I could tell about actually being at Philip K. Dick's house while toyMaker was with me and meeting Pablo. I may tell that story in a future recording. Today I'm just going to introduce this situation and speak a little bit openly about it for a time. So then they began to teach me things about the nature of reality. No longer about biology and living worlds and minds and so forth. Like, now the topics were absolutely transcendental, and had to do with the nature of time-space and the relationship of the physical universe to that which produces it, the origins of minds, and things like this, topics like this. And it was much more difficult to survive it. Many times, almost every day, early in my experience, perhaps like 2 months in, I suffered a head injury in an accident at a laundromat. Wow, I can't explain. There's so many features of the character of the experience that are really difficult to communicate. Particularly what it was like to be in a physical body with all of these senses. Constant cascades of insight that were testable and reliable, right? Not just wild mania or something like this. Yeah. So I injured myself. I took a blow to a specific spot on my skull, and they told me that long ago, blows like this were often intentionally produced in an effort to create the kind of an injury that would lead to liberation. Because as the injury was forged and healed, the brain's capacity for transformation of structure would be catalyzed. But in any case, almost every day, for a period ranging between 30 to 45 minutes and 2 or 3 hours, I would experience this incredible exhaustion, vertigo, and the feeling that I was going to lose consciousness. And this was the only thing I was really frightened of. During this time, I felt so protected in a way that I've never imagined, so safe. Right? I felt like nothing could possibly harm me. Even death was not a thing. But this thing scared me. And it was hard on me. And I didn't know what to do about it. I tried various things. It seemed to come from where the injury had taken place. And that place on my skull where I was injured, it wasn't a terrible injury, it was just a fairly serious physical strike from the edge of a laundry door, dryer door. That place tingles all the time, particularly if there's a spiritual situation going on. My website, Organelle, I spent great deals of time writing. I was afraid I would possibly forget what I had been shown and what I had learned, or that I would perish and the knowledge would be lost. This was something I was very concerned about. I wanted what I had learned to be preserved, because I felt it was possibly very, very valuable, maybe transcendentally valuable. So this process went on for about 9 months. It does appear that the process began in the calendar around the time I was conceived, and it ended around the same time in the calendar 9 months later when I was born. It trailed off somewhat slowly. I did not realize that it was going to come to an end, but it was a huge relief in many ways. So I didn't fight it. And the central phase of that experience came to a close either in late December or early January. Late December 2002, early January 2003. This changed everything that I thought or believed about what it means to be at all, to be human, to be more than human, to be a soul, to be alive, to have a mind, what consciousness is and is for, all of these things. And most of what you hear in my recordings arise from these transformations of my core being and my mind and my concerns that were the result of my experiences with whiteRabbit and toyMaker. I may speak more about this matter in the future. For today, because I'm coming back from my walk and I'm nearly home, I think this is a good place to wind down. So thank you for joining me. Please take a moment to like, share, ask a question, share an insight or your own experience. Support my channel in whatever way feels natural to you. I wish you beauty, liberation, and the fulfillment of the promise of your human incarnation. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.